Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Gaming video, we're going to be reviewing BioStar's Racing B350GT3 Micro ATX motherboard. One of the primary factors, of course, when building any PC is the budget which you're operating with, in which case BioStar are hoping to pique your interest with a motherboard which sits under the $100 price point. As of the time I'm recording this video, it's around $85 or around the equivalent in Great British pounds. Do know that we were sent this motherboard by BioStar, but all opinions are our own. This is not a sponsored video. In other words, we were not paid for this. So with that said, let's just jump into it. Considering the size of this board and the price point, it is pretty feature-packed. We'll be delving more into those in just a moment, but a quick overview includes support for multi-graphics cards, up to 2 of them in fact, RGB lighting support, multiple fan headers, support for up to 64 gigabytes of memory, and of course, fairly robust overclocking support for a B350 motherboard. In actual fact, I'm quite a big fan of the BIOS actually of this board. The layout was a bit confusing for the first 10 to 20 seconds, and then you kind of get a handle on it, and then you quite like it in fact. So, if you're interested in a board with some curious aesthetics, perhaps a smaller form factor, and perhaps operating with a smaller budget, this motherboard may be of interest to you. So let's delve into the performance, specifications, and of course a look at the board's aesthetics.
Since AMD's Ryzen and AM4 platforms have been out for a few months, this video will skip the Zen architecture and instead just focus as a review for the BioStar Racing B350GT3. If you want a more of an architecture deep dive analysis and feature set of Ryzen and the AM4 platform, then please check out one of our other videos on the channel, which we'll link in the video description. We'll start things out with the motherboard's aesthetics and features, then move on to the board's performance before winding up with our conclusions. The B350GT3 is a micro ATX motherboard and measured just 9.6 by 9.4 inches in size, making it an appealing choice for smaller case builds where full motherboards aren't a viable option. The motherboard's aesthetics are pretty interesting, with a black and white checkered flag pattern stretching from the board's rear I/O ports to the RAM expansion slots, and with the bottom right quarter of the board maintaining the dark theme. It's pleasing to look at and isn't garish, so it should fit in with most case themes. There are a few custom LEDs located on the motherboard, and a backlit Racing logo located at the top right. Other LEDs are dotted over the board, including the heatsink, although there aren't as many as, say, higher end boards, and they do lack some of the customization. The fact that these are present is definitely a welcome addition. These lights are customizable via motherboard software, which we'll cover further on, and so they should fit in with the theme of your case, or they can simply be disabled if that's your preference. The motherboard is a 4+3 phase design, with 4 being dedicated for the CPU and the remaining 3 for the North Bridge. These combine with Taiwanese APAC capacitors for much of the power distribution. The VRM heatsinks just sit on the CPU's VRM, meaning the other VRMs are exposed. Honestly, we do wish that the heatsink was larger and covered the remaining VRMs, but being realistic, it wouldn't make sense given the price of the motherboard, and we do suspect that not many of you are going to rush out to buy an $80 motherboard and then purchase a high-end processor, RAM, and attempt to clock the parts to the stratosphere. The BioStar B350GT3 has the usual 8-pin CPU power connector located at the top left of the motherboard, slightly less than an inch above the VRMs. It's pretty easy to access, as is the other 24-pin mainboard power connector, which is on the extreme right of the motherboard, right above 2 SATA ports. Fortunately, neither power connector blocks anything, a pretty rare feat given the size of the board. This does bring us to the biggest complaint of the motherboard, and that is the lack of 4-pin fan headers, with only 3 available on the motherboard. To BioStar's credit, each of these is configurable, but it would be nice to have at least 1 or 2 more. Fortunately, they are at least spaced around fairly sensibly, and mercifully, none are plonked in the middle of the motherboard, so at least cable management is not too big of a deal in a small case. As for the RAM, there are 4 slots in total, which support DDR4 up to 2666 MHz, although it can be overclocked to 3200 MHz if your RAM plays ball, and you can put in 64 GB total, which should be more than adequate. We tested the RAM clocked at 2993 MHz and had no issues. Other than that, we needed to raise voltages just a touch more than default. The motherboard's I/O has just 4 SATA ports and M2 slot that's located behind the 2 PCIe 1x slots, so in theory, Crossfire GPUs shouldn't be an issue and you shouldn't find the cards blocking the M2 drive. Speaking of PCIe slots, like other B350 motherboards, there's no PCIe x16 bifurcation, which means, in turn, no NVIDIA SLI support. You do get to access AMD's own Crossfire, but it is only going to run at 4 speed with one of the cards, so yes, it is possible to plop 2 GPUs in the system, say 2 RX 580s, but as I said, just one of those will run at 4 times PCIe slot speed, the other at normal speed. The rear of the motherboard is pretty much what you'd expect. Multiple USB ports, a DVI port, Ethernet thanks to a Realtek Dragon controller, HDMI, 3 audio ports, speaker, line-in, and headphones, and for those wanting advanced surround sound system coming from the motherboard, this may be a bit of a problem. BioStar's tweaking utility is known as Racing GT, and provides overclocking control, LED adjustment, system overview, and a whole bunch of other useful functions. Setup is pretty easy, and you simply install it and you're good to go. Vivid LED DJ controls onboard LED functionality, with the exception of the Racing GT logo on the top right corner of the board, which is unfortunately a permanent red. All other LEDs can be adjusted as required via the colour wheel, and different modes, and you can also set different header colours too, as well as disable them if you prefer. OC/OV allows you to adjust system voltages and give additional juice to the CPU, adjust the CPU's ratio limit, and provides you the ability to adjust clock speeds of the processor in turn. This works identical to how you'd imagine. A CPU ratio of 39 equals 3900 MHz, 40 is 4 GHz, and so on. It is pretty bare bones as a software package, but enough for quick and dirty tweaking. In actuality, for those preferring lighter software packages, BioStar's Racing GT might just be the ticket. It isn't quite as feature-packed as, say, MSI's Dragon software, but then again, it does do the job. The BIOS is pretty well laid out. You select different categories from the bottom of the BIOS, and the left is a base overview of the system. The BIOS is a bit odd to navigate at first, but you quickly get used to it, and I quite enjoy its personality. There are the usual options, adjusting boot device in order, adjust various north and south bridge functionality, as well as adjusting, say, CPU functionality, for example, enabling or disabling SMT or processor cores. All overclocking and voltage adjustments are made via ONE, standing for Overclocking Navigator Engine. These allow the adjustments of RAM timings, CPU overclocking, RAM overclocking, and of course various voltage controls. The controls don't have all the options of the higher end boards, especially X370 motherboards, which allow certain features such as base clock adjustments, but given that feature isn't too common in even many X370 boards, this isn't too surprising. What we have here is a nice selection of options for a board that's sitting at around the $80 mark. For casual overclockers looking to get a bit of extra free performance, you shouldn't have any issues. If you are a hardcore overclocker looking for this board for whatever reason, then you may find the features a bit limited. We conducted the majority of our testing with a Ryzen 5 1600X as we feel it's more realistic to pair this board with that processor rather than a higher end Ryzen 7 given the board's target pricing. We did conduct a few tests with the Ryzen 7 1700X processor too, and the board performed almost essentially in line with other B350 motherboards, give or take a % or two here or there, which makes almost within the realms of margin of error. Results of the Ryzen 5 1600X are almost an identical match with our other test board, an MSI B350 Tomahawk. But, of course, this motherboard is about $20 or $30 cheaper. Though, with that said, you are of course losing out to Tomahawk's advanced features, including additional expansion slots, fan headers, more robust power distribution, overclocking options, and so on. We've included a link to that review in the video description if you want to go ahead and check it out. There's very little to not like about BioStar's Racing B350GT3 motherboard. Sure, it's not as feature-packed as some of the more expensive motherboards available, but that's not too surprising really, is it?
For the price point, I feel that BioStar have really nailed this motherboard. It supports M2, multiple graphics card configurations, fan headers, yes, are on board and they are a little limited, but still, they're there and you could of course add more through the usual ways. RGB support, which admittedly isn't as robust as like a $200 or $300 board, but once again, it's still there for an $85 board. It's solid, had no problems with overclocking the processor or the RAM, and overall, even the Ethernet connection, the software, is all pretty nice to use. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this review, I was actually kind of surprised by how much I really like the BIOS.
BioStar are clearly appealing to two separate markets here. The first is gamers on a budget. After all, you don't need those additional fan headers, care about hardcore overclocking, or running two Nvidia cards and SLI if you are on a tight budget. They just want a reliable motherboard that's got the features they need for gaming. Perhaps a little light overclocking and room for expansion in the future.
So in my opinion, if you are looking for a board for a Ryzen build, for example, let's say you're looking to build a Ryzen 5 1600, the type of system, then I feel that this is perfect. And that's one of the reasons that we stuck with that processor with this motherboard. It just seemed more logical, because let's face it, if you're going to plonk in like an 1800X, it's more likely you're going to also opt to buy, let's say, a higher end X370 motherboard as well. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, subscribe. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.